Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for your patience. Thank you for being here with us. My name is Peter, and I help direct the events here at Strand. For a little bit of history, Strand was founded in 1927 by the Bass family over on what was then 4th Avenue's Book Row. Stretching from Union Square to Astra Place, Book Row gradually dwindled until after over 92 years, the Strand is the sole survivor, still in the Bass family, running 400 events, still a union shop as well, and still... UAW, thank you very much, and still housing new and used books. Tonight I am extremely thrilled to be here with you all and to be working with Jacobin and the Nation to welcome Jane McAlevey to the Strand. Jane is an organizer, author, and scholar, currently a senior policy fellow at the University of California at Berkeley's Labor Center. In 2012, her book, Raising Expectations and Raising Hell, was named the most valuable book of 2012 by The Nation, where she now writes as the strikes correspondent as well as at the Jacobin as a biweekly advice columnist. She's also the author of No Shortcuts, Organizing for Power in the New Gilded Age, and as of just yesterday, A Collective Bargain, Unions, Organizing, and the Fight for Democracy, which we are here to celebrate tonight. I gotta start writing these in. I always forget. Joining her is Astra Taylor, the American Book Award-winning author of The People's Platform and Democracy May Not Exist, but We'll Miss It When It's Gone, as well as the director of 3 acclaimed documentaries, Zizek, Examined Life, and most recently, What is Democracy? Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, the London Review of Books, The Guardian, N+1, and elsewhere. It is a real privilege to have these brilliant thinkers and organizers with us here tonight, so without further ado, please join me in welcoming Jane and Astra to the stage.
Hello, everyone. My name is Astra. It's such a pleasure to be here with Jane, who I've never met in person before, but whose work I've been reading and learning from. Over the internet, I think I confess to you that just phrases, the titles of her books have just made it into my thinking, right? I'll just write an essay and suddenly it'll be, there are no shortcuts. We need to raise expectations. Your work... It's something I was so hungry for. How do we do this thing called organizing that I know I care about? I know we need to build power, but where do I go to learn this? This is, as you point out in this book, there's not a class you take in college that's called, effectively organizing against the boss or the establishment. And so your books have been such a revelation to me, to my fellow organizers, to so many people. So I just want to say that it's a huge honor to be here. This new book, A Collective Bargain, is really wonderful because it links 2 things I really love, unions and democracy, in one. And so I guess I'm going to sort of recycle a question format from my film, What is Democracy? And just ask you, what is democracy? And also, what is a union? And why are you thinking those things together in this book?
I guess I should have thought about that question, huh?
I thought it was an easy question because you actually say in the beginning one time, this question of...
Yeah, democracy. So, first of all, thank you, Astra. I'm super delighted that I never met her, popped her a question, direct message. It's the first use I found for Twitter in my life. I DM'd someone. People who really read my stuff will know I'm very verging on anti-social media. Anyway, but I DM'd her in the middle of the night one night, Thanksgiving, and she was like, sure. And I was just like, oh, God, I got Astra. So that's really fun because I love your movies and your books. Yeah. So, and it's really nice to have all of you here. So great to see you. The thing about democracy is, until I read Astra's book in the last 2 weeks and then watched the film and the whole thing, now I have to think much more deeply about it. But I'm going to try and just go back to how I do think about it, which is I think about participation. To me, the word participation is the biggest word I use. It's the most significant word. It's the measurable word. And I feel like in the labor movement, certainly the side I identify with, which is progressive, I don't know, left of center, something. There's so much debate about the word. I think it's in general there's so much debate about the word democracy. And there's definitely a debate about it inside of the trade union movement, or it'd be nice if there was more of a debate, maybe, but there's some debate about it. And at some point, I like to just I try and just get rid of it and think about what is it? What does it look like? What are we actually doing? So to me, whenever I'm doing trainings now or teaching or lectures or something, the title is usually Building a High Participation Union. because that puts a point on what we're actually trying to do, which is get 100% participation by every single worker in the workplace, fundamentally making crucial decisions about their own life. So when 100% of thousands of people are participating actively in making decisions about their life, then I feel like I've hit what democracy looks like, which is different than the chant that we use at a lot of protests, which actually frustrates me. That chant, Mike, sends me like the way social media does. I'm just like, oh, this is not what my democracy looks like. But anyway, just saying.
That feeling was literally what inspired me to make my film. I would be like, is this what democracy looks like? It can't be 50 people in the, marching, not
Street.
really knowing where we're headed or what our target is or what power we wield. Okay, but what is you begin a chapter by saying that one of your mentors drilled this question into your head: what is a union? You have to be able to say to people.
Yeah, what is a union? That's right. It was like drill session at $11.99 in the old days, which is very simple. A union is nothing more or less than all the workers coming together who work for one employer to make the employer do that which the workers want and stop the employer from doing that which the workers don't want. Mm-hmm. That is the definition that I learned about what a union is. And then there's an important after sentence, which is for what the members want, for whatever the members want. And that follow-up matters, right? Because that's what leads us into anti-gentrification campaigns and housing campaigns and gender justice and anti-racism. I mean, that stuff's implicit in the work anyway. But it's what allows us and suggests that we should be going outside of the workplace anytime the members want to go outside the workplace and campaign for something much more robust than even just the right to a decent job without an oppressive boss who's overlording over them. In the case of hospital workers, 12 hours a day. Could you imagine a jerk? There's a lot of them. So empowering workers to take control of their workplace and actively make decisions. Like in a good contract, we really push the participation question even higher because we begin to strip away the power of management, right, in fundamental ways, which is what we should do in civil society.
Yeah. So to go back to that question, that idea of full participation, I mean, that's one thing that your books do so well, and this one does too, and give these really rich accounts of what it's like to engage people who are skeptical, hostile, doubtful, overworked, all of these things, talking to people necessarily on the same page, and giving these narrative accounts for someone on the outside. It's like, okay, it's so helpful because you sense it. There's a sense of this is what it looks like. This is what it means to talk to someone who doesn't already agree with me. I mean, just why is that what the left needs to be doing in this moment? Not just, rallying preaching to the choir, I suppose, is the phrase.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. I think preaching to the choir is what I sort of described in the last book as the self-selecting model, right? When I was outlining that in the PhD dissertation, what's a self-selecting organization, which is the same thing as preaching to the choir. It means everyone who already agrees with you is showing up to do something. And that's about a third on a good day if we do our work right. In any workplace, if you just rely on the people, if you post for a meeting, and say, come to the meeting about blah, blah, blah. On any given day, about a third of the workers are pissed off. And then the problem is there's 2/3 who aren't. So what are you doing about the 2/3 that actually don't have that specific issue at that moment with that unit or whatever it is, wherever we are? So to get to the 100% participation, and part of what was like a gift, was a gift to the universe, frankly, and a gift to my book writing process was that the LA strike finally went off after months of the boss delaying them. I kept being like, damn it, I'm trying to get it in the book. Where's Emma? Oh yeah, that's my editor, by the way. She deserves a round of applause right there. And other people. But Emma Janaski, I was like, can I have another week? I think the strike's really going to happen. I just need to shove it into the book. So the gift of the book and the gift of what lets me illustrate getting to 100% participation, the Philly chapters as well, but is where I get to describe how they rebuilt the Los Angeles Teachers Union. And this is an important thing in a very short period of time. Okay, like the 11 years that are left ticking around the climate crisis, it's really important for me as an organizer to say, I think, that all of this work can happen very quickly. And part of what happens a lot in, like when I go places and I'm giving a talk about organizing, and people are like, oh, we don't have much time, lady. That shit takes like a decade. Whatever they think. Like they think organizing, it takes like a decade, to door knock your block, whatever. But people think organizing is this really long process, and it's not. Right? Like as a campaigner who's also an organizer, so I campaign with the hat of an organizer, which means I'm trying to build maximum participation among the largest base of people humanly possible, right? That's what organizers wake up to do, to get 100% of everyone possible involved. It's really, you can do it, like every time I've had to do it, it's in like 6 months, 5 months, 4 months, a year. 12 months, and I'm talking about 30,000 people, 40,000 people, 50,000 people. So if you think that it's possible to build unity among tens of thousands of people who really have, the thing about union organizing that's so special, and why I'm never leaving it, as irritating as the entire whatever can be on any given day of the week, is because there is nothing else that tests us for the big fights the way union fights do, because it's a total cross-section of America. And it's the opposite of self-selecting. And if you want to get 100% of 34,000 teachers in Los Angeles to agree to walk off the job in a high-risk collective action, you've got a subset of, let's say, 5,000 of them who are like registered Republicans from the Valley who teach in those schools. You've got another 4,000 who are, right? Like you have serious numbers of people who don't wake up agreeing with you at all. And you have to forge unity in a really intense way fairly quickly. So what lets me describe that in the book are 2 chapters. The Philadelphia chapter, which is the last campaign that I was running a couple of years ago, big campaign, and then the Los Angeles teacher strike chapter, which again was a gift at the end. But like to build that kind of unity, to get 34,000 people, really literally, I think people, like sometimes, especially like academic audiences, when I came to graduate school late in life, so late in life, and I will never name the professor, but like my 3rd day in a class, someone said to me, God, it's so good you're here. You're going to learn like objective thinking, Jane, and you're going to learn, these were direct words to me, and you're going to learn actually how to measure and be objective and get evidence. And I literally was sitting in this classroom, my head was about to explode. I won't tell you all the curse words that came through my mind at once. But I was like, have you ever run an effing strike? I'm just thinking in my head, like, we measure and get evidence and have objective measurements every single day in a hard campaign. Like every day we know, is every worker wearing that button or is 5 of them not? What unit, what time are they not wearing it, and why? We get a lot of evidence, you know what I mean? And we have a lot of consistent questions too, by the way. So, I think that is like to me, like if you can figure out how to unify tens of thousands of people who share no common political belief at all, except the boss hired them and they came to work. Like that's a measure for how we can unify America, really. It's that hard. And a lot of people who I talk about in the book, even in the chapter right in the campaign that I was organizing in, like Marnay Payne, who I talk a lot about because she lets me, was a completely, she started out undecided, as what we call an undecided, right? We have like leader, we have all these assessments. So she started out as an undecided. Like we spoke to her and she was like non-committal, not sure. Didn't throw anything in our face, didn't spit at us. That happens from the 4s, that's the antis. Didn't throw a piece of paper at us initially in the parking lot, So she's like an undecided, not committing to the union, doesn't really think she needs it, isn't opposed to it. She would very quickly get organized. The boss would out-organize us. They had 18 union busters in the campaign I described in the book. So IRI Inc., by the way, who Google just hired. So if you're reading the New York Times headlines about who did Google hire, the SOBs we just fought in Philadelphia in this big hospital fight, and several times. But so they had IRI Inc. in this huge hospital in Philly against the workers, and they had 18 full-time consultants. So when people ask me, by the way, I know I'm going off message for a minute, but when people on the left say to me, why do we need full-time organizers? I'm like, they have 18 full-time professional union-busting organizers going at these workers. Why do you think we need organizers? Do you think the workers know what to do when the boss starts firing people? Actually, no, right, in the first campaign. So anyway, there's 18 of them, and they got to Marnay very quickly.
And how many workers?
In that hospital, we had exactly 1,000 in the first election. We had 1,000 nurses. There were 7 hospitals. But in the campaign I get deep in the book, there was exactly 1,000 registered nurses in the second biggest hospital in Philly. The union busters got her. So she went from being undecided to be anti-union very quickly. and virulently anti-union. And she began to lead the workers' committee against the union. And it would take us another 4.5 months of really dogged work to get her back. And why did it matter to get her back? Because she's what we call an organic leader, because she's a natural leader, because she controlled, seriously, 66 nurses in her unit, day shift, night shift, wouldn't do a thing until she moved. And when she moved, by the way, we had the first 100% unit, right? She went from 0, okay, we had 1 union member on the night shift until she was told not to do that again. And then we went from 0 in her unit on membership cards to 66 members in a matter of 2 days.
Yeah. Talk about this idea of natural leaders, because this is something that also recurs, and how you conceptualize people that you're talking to and how you identify that and what it means to be a leader.
Yeah. So so germane to outside the workplace too, right? To like how we're gonna, I don't know, have a debt strike, just saying, or something else. So these natural leaders are so unbelievably important in our work. And it is a key to what is different between organizing and what I call mobilizing, right? And mobilizing is we talk to ourselves, we're social mediaing with ourselves, we come to a rally, we all like each other, we're cool, we feel better, but I'm not sure what we just won at the rally, but it was good. But anyway, so that's like mobilizing and self-selecting. And those are we're all activists. Like everyone who comes to a rally, almost by definition, is going to be some kind of an activist. And that's good. Like we need a lot of us. But then there are these people who are, I call them organic leaders in the dissertation. Some people call them natural leaders. But they are people who are leaders long before any organizer shows up. Mm-hmm. They already have the leadership among their coworkers. They're fairly easily identifiable if you actually know the questions and just start to ask. You can't actually identify them by looking around the room. You can't go, in my experience, you can't go to a big meeting and have a good turnout and like someone says a bunch of really good things in the back of the room and like a junior organizer who's not well trained next to me will be like, oh God, she was great, let's get her. And it's like, first thing I'll say is like, based on what? Did you just make that assessment? Like the only way you find out who the leader of the workers is by talking to a lot of workers who that person works with. And so we just ask, if the employer asks you to do something and you're not sure how to do it, which worker do you talk to? Like that question is the question I've asked, I'm probably not exaggerating, 20,000 times or something in the last 2 decades. So like how to identify these natural leaders is actually, I think, not that hard. Sadly, 95% of unions probably don't know how to do it anymore in this country. And I'm not exaggerating. And that's part of why we're losing at the moment. So it's like the labor movement went to the activist model instead of the activist community dragging the labor model into the broader fight against Trump and Trumpism, which is what we need, quite frankly. Like we need to understand how to find the natural leaders and how to win them over to the cause and have them understand on their own, because that's what organizing is, right? It's like people coming to the understanding on their own. They actually mean to be standing with this crowd over here and not that crowd over there.
And you say, too, that those leaders are not necessarily people who hold certain positions. You can't identify a leader by the fact that they have the official leadership role.
Yeah. No pin. It says, hey, I'm Marnay Payne, I'm the leader in the telemetry unit. I'm about to kill you people when IRI gets their hands on me. No. But the thing is, the boss knows who they are, too. And part of, again, in the interesting debates that sometimes play out within the labor movement about, or the broader left, like, do you need organizers? There's so many times when that question makes me crazy, like, this is what democracy looks like. Because organizing is a method. Mm-hmm. It is a method. It's a craft. It's a practice. You get better when you do it. And for workers who are, like, brand new, like those 1,000 nurses in Philly in one big hospital, when IRI Inc. is called in, and by the way, no one announces it, right? The boss doesn't put out a memo saying, hey, just so you know, the 18 union busters showed up today, and their job is to terrorize you very subtly and make you totally confused and make it so you hate every single person on your floor, and so you never want to talk to anybody until the campaign is over. And the psychological war that they're going to launch on you is that every time the word union is said, they associate it with the total pain that's taken over the hospital and all the new rules that they just imposed on you. They don't announce that, right? They just begin to do it. So one is you have to know what it looks like. You have to know what's coming. You have to warn the workers. You have to tell the workers when weird people in strange suits start showing up. make sure you let us know. Try and get pictures of them. Take your phone out. Like, there's a lot of things we do. And then it's like, it's the preparation. It's like letting workers know. There's 4 phases to the boss campaign. Here's phase 1. Here's phase 2. Here's what they're going to do next. Here's what they're going to do next. So you got to get ahead of them and stay ahead of them. Like, there's so much to do to win. And when there's 18 professionals going against you, it's helpful to have at least one person who's been through a big union fight to say, you can beat them, but here's what you have to do to beat them. And you have to do it before them, and then you're going to beat them, right? Which we did. I mean, in the case I put in the book about Philadelphia was particularly representative today, which is why I put it in, because we won the election in round 1, and then the employer filed legal charges against us contesting the union election. That's most of what happens in union elections in America today. So if you've ever done a new organizing campaign, you go through this extraordinary effort, you win, you unify completely disparate human beings who share no identity until the union campaign begins, and yeah, it's a totally amazing. It's an amazing process.
It's so, there are a lot of books about democracy these days. I wrote one, and a lot of them are about the crisis of democracy. If you haven't heard, we're in a crisis, and you do something very fun at the beginning where you say, like so many pundits tell us, we need to conserve our institutions, value our institutions, and one of the most valuable institutions is unions, right? And your book is very different than so many of these other crisis of democracy books because you show that people can win. All of your case studies are post-2016 case studies of victories in fields, mainly with sort of majority women, women of color, right, creating, revitalizing the labor movement. So I think that's incredibly powerful. But your book has this really interesting motif of sort of democracy, big picture political democracy, and then the economy, right? And you trouble that distinction by this sort of public sphere and the private sphere and show that, robust unions are essential if we want to have a system of political equality, because you won't have that in a situation where wealth is extremely concentrated. And then how so many of the problems with political democracy are actually mirrored within the union struggles because there's corrupt elections, there's this influx of dark money, right? I mean, I think that's really interesting, but talk about that more, how actually there's really strong analogies to be made between a union election and a political election. Yeah,
and this is what's interesting to me, like the 2016 election and then the 2018 election, for me, given that, it's early January. Like, when did I start writing that book? A little less than a year ago. When I started writing that book. Anyway, writing that book very quickly, I had the benefit of getting through the 2018 election cycle too. So, both those elections gave me a way, I felt like, for the first time, to describe to ordinary Americans what goes on in every union election. Mm-hmm. Because it's what went on in what should be the Stacey Abrams victory in Georgia. And it's what went on in Florida with the Gillum race for governor. And it's what went on in 2016 in the national election. So the very mechanisms that professional union busters use and have crafted, again, for decades to great effect, are now being exported by Steve Bannon and Steve Miller and operatives like them into the regular political arena. Like, that's what Cambridge Analytica, that's what Steve Bannon, like, that's literally, every time I read anything that Steve Bannon is doing, it's like IRI Inc. It's like he is a union buster. The union buster is now in the White House. And they're running a union busting campaign out of the White House. And that starts with dividing and conquering people. It involves heavy cheating, a lot of lying, terrifying people. Like, that's what happens in every single union election in this country, if it's like a big workplace or a hard workplace or a workplace where the boss cares at all, right? Like, they're going to hire union busters who are just like Steve Bannon, and they'll have a sidekick just like little evil Miller, and they will have a pile of like small evil people who are running around behind the scenes trying to screw your entire life. Like, that's what they do, and divide everybody. So, like in the chapter which I'm just going to say Emma renamed Who Killed the Unions. Thank you. I was like, oh, good, she got it when I wrote it the second time. It went from what happened to the unions to being called Who Killed the Unions, because it became incredibly clear, unions didn't just go away. I love that little nifty narrative they have. When you listen to like liberal media, it's like, whatever happened to those unions? Jesus Christ, you know what I mean? Like, did you ever meet Steve Bannon? Okay, welcome to our world. Steve Bannon and Steve Miller are who we deal with in every election. And they're that evil. And they're that methodical, and they're that deliberative. And so when we overcome them, it's like, to me, it's like, we ought to look at what we're doing when we overcome the Steve Bannons and Steve Millers of the world, because that is what we're doing in a hard union campaign. And it is a war. And I use a lot of war language. And I think after the first book, speaking of which, Andy, my first editor, is in the back of the room from Verso. On the first book, it was like I used a lot of war language, and people, some people react badly to that. Like in our, in the broader progressive community, like, do you really have to use all that war language? And I'm like, have you ever been in a union campaign? Because it really is class war, and it's in your face, and it's, yeah. So to me, it's like, that chapter I sent to Nelson Lichtenstein, historian, to fact check me on the history chapter, because at some point I was like, everything else in here I got. I'm not worried. I'm writing about campaigns I've been involved in or ran or whatever. And then I'm like on the history chapter. I don't have enough time at all, but someone needs to read this, and Jeff's already done too much work. So I got this guy Nelson, brilliant historian, to read it. And he was like, God, I had no idea that the demise of Stacey Abrams' race was going to let you finally make it clear to everyone what goes on in union elections. Yeah. So he really liked that. And I was like, oh, great. So that's it.
So more on the Who Killed the Union front. I mean, you're wonderfully, refreshingly critical of Democrats, and also sort of self-styled progressive Silicon Valley billionaires. Oh. And so there's also... So I want you to talk about them and the way in which, there's also the framing of, well, of course they just inevitably died because they're not innovative, and we live in a new gig economy where, she brilliantly says, we debate today whether workers are even workers, right? This is this sort of myth that automation and the internet are just going to make unions obsolete.
And make the world perfect, right? I mean, that's the whole promise. Like leisure time, take up hang gliding, go rock climbing. Didn't you read all that stuff like 10 years ago, right? That was like the new society that was coming.
You drive Uber for fun, is it? Yeah.
Exactly. So, I split my time between New York and Northern California. And the Northern California side, you really just like being around Silicon Valley just makes my blood extra boil some days because of the hypocrisy, because of the incredible danger, the hypocrisy of what they all promised in the beginning of their shared economy, which lasted for like a second, and it flipped into shares on, Wall Street. I mean, they're running this narrative like unions are just irrelevant. And what I try and walk people through is that there's been waves and waves and waves since, the middle of the 1850s, when the bosses create the same narrative. Oh, changing economy, just get rid of that institution. Yep. And it's like, actually, pretty sure it's going to stick around. So I contrast at one point, like the difference between the construction trades, like in what that employment structure looks like, which is radically different than what the employment structure is for a registered nurse in a hospital. And I just begin to walk through how very different the employment structures already are. The issue isn't the union. The issue is the union busters and the boss, right? Mm-hmm. So all of Silicon Valley, Jesus, every Amazon warehouse. I mean, and I talk in that chapter about how most people have no idea that the conditions in every auto factory in the United States were as bad or worse than today's Amazon warehouses. And if you don't know, the one that they invite you to and the promoted things they do on Twitter, like, come see our factory, they don't look like that. So, people are having serious mental and physical issues in every warehouse. And I'm just like, it took the United Auto Workers it took auto workers several rounds before we got to the UAW. And it's taking us several rounds with Amazon, but there is no solution to the crisis of Jeff Bezos and Amazon but a goddamn strong union by Amazon workers. And it's going to take a while.
Yeah, and you Reed Hastings makes an appearance in the chapter on the LA teacher strikes too. I mean, maybe he's a shit, but
Netflix mogul.
But maybe talk about why the fight has moved. So a really interesting part of the history that you just lay out so clearly is why the fight has moved to public sector unions.
Yeah. Okay, so I say there are three waves, basically. There are three waves of killing the unions. Wave one is the Taft-Hartley Act of 1947, right, where they roll back all the great things that workers had won in 1935 under the National Relations Act. So we have 1935 to 1947, this like 12 years that I start the book off describing and talking about, right? 12 years where American workers had like freedom. Freedom to participate and build democracy in their workplace. 12 short years, which mirrors another 12-year period, right, when the Civil War ended, whatever. We have these little brief moments in America when you sort of see 12 years of promise. And then the bosses figure it out and take it all away. So Taft-Hartley 47, that's the first serious attack. But the culture is so strong, the culture is so strongly pro-union at that point in this country that the bosses can't really use a lot of what they had put in it initially. It just takes a while for them to like do the psychological and public media narrative war on workers and unions. So then we hit phase two, which is the early 1970s. When they begin to weaponize globalization, right? Like globalization is nothing but union busting. Like I argue in the book, it had no, seriously, it had no purpose but to break unions in the United States, Canada, Europe, and several other countries, right? By relocating all the best jobs everywhere into slave-like conditions where workers had no rights. They're hard to do here, but we can still do them. So that was wave two, and they functionally knocked out, not entirely, and of course there's lots of auto plants in the South and whatever, but like they functionally knocked out a lot of manufacturing jobs from this country by moving them out of the country. So that was wave two. And then, when we were down to 6% unionization in the private sector, there was only one big sector of unionized workers left. The largest single sector of unionized workers left are teachers in America, which is why they've been under a pronounced attack for 2 decades. And what amazes me, like Waiting for Superman, people remember that movie? Like there were Hollywood movies going after teachers, right? Yes. Like there's been such an intense attack on teachers. And people, it's like there's a lot of reasons, but frankly, I always say to people, no, sorry, forget all this. There's one reason, which is it's the single largest block of unionized workers in the United States of America, and they have a bullseye on them by the right wing. And so they had to craft a whole new strategy legally to go after them because it's not one national law that governs the public sector. It's 50 laws in 50 states. So it took them longer, right? But the right wing is much better about doing power structure analysis than the left. Sorry, or liberals, God. So liberals don't think about it, right? They don't power? No, this is policies. And then the left is like shit for brains when it comes to power. So, and then there's the right wing, and it's actually terrifying how good they are. So like they are patiently sitting around figuring it out. Okay, now we got to take these people down. So what's a 50-state strategy? Ugh, that's going to be so tiring. How about the Supreme Court? Yeah. Right, good. Let's get some appointments, and then let's start laying the groundwork, and we have to create fictional law. So first we're going to create Knox v. 10 SEIU, whatever. There was like a series of cases because the right wing is so smart. They engineered a series of cases beginning in 2012 that got them to 2018 to Janus. So there were a wave of cases, and in each one, Scalia mostly was just making up fiction, just writing things in like the beginning and the preamble and the ruling itself, so that then they can refer back to the Supreme Court ruling. And he's referring back to his own writing and his own ruling in the union busting case before, right? So anyway, they like lay, because it's like 50 states, they're not going to reasonably come into California and do in California or New York what they did to Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. They just can't, right? There's way too many better, I'm going to say better Democrats, just better. can't say good, in like the blue states, and certainly in California and New York, where unions still have a lot of power and actually put some decent people in, and socialists, we have little things happening, it's all very good, Chicago, elsewhere, but like, so, they would never have been able to take down the unions in those states, and so then they had to think, well, how are we going to do it? It's not a national law. And we're not going to be able to root them out of California, Oregon, Washington, Massachusetts. You know what I mean? So like they had to hatch this brilliant legal strategy, which would somehow position the First Amendment as somehow allegedly the First Amendment and union dues don't go together. It's like whatever. So, but they're brilliant, and they did it, and they had to do it because it's the last big sector of union workers left, and it's the only and because they hate government, by the way, right? Like they want to kill government, and unions actually do a decent job of defending the concept of the public sector. So I think I said in my first ever Nation story in 2010, that like the attack on the public sector in 2010 being launched in early 2011, I was writing it right after the election in the midterm disasters in 2010, and I say like the right going after public sector unions is like it couldn't bring them bigger joy. It's everything they hate, they're going after at once. Yeah. Black people in jobs, women who are black in jobs with a pension, who really don't deserve it from their view, takers and the makers thing going on there. Government, and taxes and regulations.
And education.
Unions, right? And education. Like, what could be more exciting if you're a right-wing person than to take down all of them in one fell swoop, right? So gutting public sector unions and fully attacking them is like, in their mind, the final offensive. And what's so beautiful to me is that the West Virginia education strike broke out the day that Janus was being heard on February 26th. In 2018. It was totally amazing. And that was not, of course, planned that way. I mean, the Supreme Court had the date set for a long time for February 26th. That date's like emblazoned in my brain. Like I was just, oh my God, it's Janus hearing day. We know this is coming next. Mm-hmm. And then as an answer that no one could have thought, there's no better answer to what happened the day the Supreme Court heard the Janus case, except 35,000 workers walked off the job in West Virginia and shut the state down. Yeah. Like right in your face. You know what I mean? You're coming at us in the courts, we're coming right at you. In the streets, out the doors, spilling onto the roadways, into the Capitol. No.
And that's what I think you're arguing that unions have to do moving forward, right? Because the Supreme Court is not going to get suddenly more friendly to the idea of labor rights. And aside, I did just read, I don't know if other people have read this book, The Taming of Free Speech, but actually the First Amendment, the early interpretation of civil liberties, was all intended to be for unions, right? For this right to agitation. And part of the early ACLU was they called themselves partisans of labor. So there's something very ironic about the switch. But yeah, what is the strategy for? I mean, there's on the one hand, there seems to be this revitalization and interest in workplace agitation, and we see it with tech workers, we see it with teachers, we see it with journalists. But there's going to be the legal regime is not about to get more supportive. Yeah. So these examples of high participation campaigns are what you're saying has to be done moving forward, right? Yeah.
Yeah, high participation campaigns have to happen. A lot more energy going into the labor movement has to happen. A lot of progressive energy in the labor movement has to happen. And I think it's entirely possible, actually, which is what, when I'm feeling sick to my stomach, have we more ballistic bomb? Whatever's going on, like every day, right? Like every day is so intense. And I am so optimistic because I've had so much experience so often with so many thousands of workers, and there's so many thousands more workers out there having the same experience, that they're winning. And so part of what I'm trying to argue in the book, I mean, the book has several audiences, I think, but aiming it at sort of liberals and progressives, it's like I'm trying to say, there isn't any way we're going to get to a better place unless and until a lot more workers walk off the job and create a crisis in supermajority strikes. And so only a good union, only a good small d democratic, meaning high participation union, can actually pull off the kind of strikes that we've been seeing. So we need a lot of good unions right now. And the story from Los Angeles, and then it's very similar, different, plays out, the nuances are different, but like the story I tell about the teachers in Los Angeles rebuilding that union, it was an absolute I'm being generous, puts the microphone out, do nothing teachers union for 20-something years until a bunch of teachers said, we're sick of this, we're running for office, we're taking it over. I believe there's some people in the audience here maybe who are doing that too in their places. But anyway, so that's actually what has to happen. I could actually just interview her about her book all night, by the way, but there's so many things that you talk about in your book, like the chapter on spontaneity versus structure, where I think there are so many unions that are still out there that have just sunken into lackluster spaces, either sunken into them or they have bad leadership just outright, right? So the question is, how do good ordinary workers learn to take them over and win elections? And I want to say 3 things about that at least. One is, if you can't win a union election, we're not taking the country back. So figure it out. People are like, well, how do we do that? It seems really hard. Let's complain about the union instead. And I'm like, Jesus, leftist. Stop complaining and make a plan and take it over. There's a lot of examples. So do we want to whine from the left, or do we want to actually make a highly productive union to figure out how to stop the march towards authoritarianism and white nationalism being run on the White House? Take over your union. And that's a really good practice in democracy. Learn how to do it. You want to run for city council, you want a different president, you want Bernie Sanders to win, try winning a local union election first. It's hard, and you're going to learn a lot doing it. And when you do, you're going to be in control of a ton of resources. So in Chicago and Los Angeles, when they won, overnight you have 50, 75, 100 full-time staff at your disposal. What do we do now? And tons of money, right? Everything that the right wing is trying to kill. There's a reason they're trying to kill it. It's a lot of resources. And actually, you can do a lot more when you have a lot of resources. So I have been impassionately, and I spend a lot of my volunteer time, not my work time, working with caucuses inside of unions. That's been my more quiet work. It's kind of out there, I guess I do it now, so I do. But, it's trying to teach people, all the same skills that we use to beat an employer, right, are the same skills that you need to use to win an internal union election.
I want to talk this question you're in an interesting position. You can pick fights. How do you identify what's a strategic fight? We were talking about this earlier. There's sometimes a sense that the fight is wherever conditions are worse, right? That we go to the place with the most pain, the most need. Those aren't necessarily the most strategic fights if we want to shift a power analysis. And I think this is one of the many sort of epiphanies your writing sparks is okay, yes, power map. Where is the power?
Yeah. Another thing that's great about unions, again, for all the flaws, many warts, all of it. But another thing that's really great is, by and large, we do have a theory of change, and we have a theory of power. It's called the strike, and withdrawing labor. And so when you start, when I started as a full-time organizer, you realize that the phone calls that are coming in, we want, hey, help, we need a union. The phone calls coming in are coming in generally from really bad workplaces, from really distressed workplaces, from workplaces where the employer is a completely awful thing. But also, often, there are workplaces where the boss is running a bad operation. And what I say in the book is, it also means if they're running a bad operation, it also means they've probably run the finances into the ground. So you're not going to be able to set new standards, create the new vision for a much more equal society on the back of a poor employer or a bad employer. But that's where the workers are calling from. So there's this mismatch. Workers who want unions are pissed off, and they're calling you from a really bad place, like a bad employer. And you're not going to say, sorry, you're not important, bye. You're going to go help them. But if you're being strategic and you want to challenge Trumpism, and you want to reinstitute the concept of pensions, but maybe for all people in America, and you want to, win, whatever, you want to win big. I always say to people, I did not become a union organizer and union negotiator to have little victories. I don't care about them. Every fight is going to be a fight to the death, and we're going to win big. The expectation is going to be high, and I'm going to explain to the workers, you can actually win all the things that you're talking about if you're at 90% participation. You actually can do this. But if you want to have a standard-setting contract like that, to hold up to the whole world and be like, yo, look what these people just did, you have to do that with an employer who has some money. So that's a conundrum because you don't usually have workers calling from those places because the conditions are much better there. So that's an interesting dilemma. And part of what I say, and for everyone who knows, well, I don't see her, everyone who knows Frances Fox Piven, who I did my PhD with, she and I had this perpetual argument, that whatever, rioting and whatever, it's like all grievance-based, right? In sociology, there's a lot of rap that, like, people act, as rational actors, whatever, act, when they're upset about things. And truthfully, I'd say the biggest fights, the most successful campaigns were what workers won was absolutely life-changing at the end of the contract was not from an employer where the workers were calling us. It was us making a strategic decision. We have to go pick these 10 employers. They're the largest employers in the country. They have the most money in the hospital sector. We map them. They exist in these states. What are the we do a ton of front-end research, power, structure, analysis, research on the whole country. Now I'm doing it on the whole world. But where do you get them? If you want to change history, and start taking the country back, or you just wait. It's like the self-selecting thing. It's like we're not sitting around waiting for people to call us who want a union. We actually have to go figure out how to start a conversation with workers who are doing okay, actually, working for a strategic employer. So the example of that is like HCA in my younger years, or Tenet, right? Two major healthcare employers a long time ago. And we had to, people weren't calling us from those hospitals by and large. We made a decision that if we wanted to take the entire country union, back when SEIU, just saying, had a national theory about that before we were all purged. We had a national theory of actually how to take the entire country union. And all we had to do was take 3 key hospital chains in 25 markets. And by market, I mean a labor market. So honestly, we would have taken the country union that way. We had to take 25 labor market campaigns across 4 employers, and their breadth, the employer's breadth in the country is such, and the amount of money they had is such that had we taken those 25 markets, we actually functionally would have been doing sectoral bargaining, the shiny new object that people keep talking about. We would have actually been forcing the hospital industry basically into national sectoral negotiations and standard setting, because we would have taken the most important players in the market. So that's I've spent most of my life doing those campaigns, where we're doing a strategic campaign, where we're sitting around and figuring out if we want to literally change the entire hospital delivery system in this country, who do we have to take down?
So thinking, I'm not in a union. I'm not a union organizer. I do want
Someone get a card. Sorry.
Yep. There are so many analogies, though, so many insights that are applicable from the campaigns you write about. But I'd love for you to tease some of them out. Help us be less shitty leftists.
I love the left. I just want us to organize better. I think that you've asked about a fair amount of them. But so one is the one we were just talking about, right? Have a strategy. You know what I mean? It really helps people. We need just a little one, just something. Strategic focus, which, by the way, in our world means making hard choices. And we're very bad at that, right? It's like when every worker's calling from every scumbag-run hospital in the South, and I'm working in the South, it's like, okay, all right, well, it's going to be all we can, or we even spend our whole life responding to that, or we can actually do something that's going to actually pay off for those same workers much better, but in a couple of years, which is we're going to take the biggest employers around them and force the whole market up, right? The theory of, in the 1930s, I think when our left had a much deeper sense of strategy, much deeper sense of power analysis, and a much deeper sense of strategy, they woke up and they were able to make decisions about, we're going to go after 4 strategic sectors, right? So the CIO, obviously heavily influenced by the Reds, communists mostly, socialists, but they had a theory of power, and they were we're going to take 4 industries, and if we take these 4 industries, we're going to take this country, and if we take these 4 industries, how are we going to start? Well, we're going to start in the places where they have the same thing that we were doing for the hospital sector, but 80 years later, which is, in 1936, which I talk about in one of the chapters, in 36, they understood, okay, we're going to try steel and auto were among the 2 core sectors, right, that the left understood. We have to take those sectors. I'm arguing right now we have to take education, take healthcare. take logistics. We do that. It's like those are our strategic sectors now. But anyway, so, and some others, but like key strategic sectors. So they didn't just decide these are the sectors we need. They then said, okay, and what's the path to it? So where are we most likely to win? Where can we set a new standard? Same thing that we were doing with the hospital sector back in 2003 when I was working in the national headquarters. So, and so they said, in 1936, we're going to have to go all out for the governor's races in 2 states. Well, if you're trying to take auto and steel, and you're the labor movement, and it's 1934 and 1935, and you're trying to win, what 2 states do you need to take the governor's races in to make sure that the guard can't be called out on you? Michigan and Pennsylvania. Right? So in 1936, the unions, for the first time ever, went all out at state-level campaigning, which was not something that the labor movement had been doing. So the unions went all out and said, we have to take the governor's races in 2 states, because that's going to set us up for when we walk out in 1936 in massive strikes. They're not going to call the dogs, the guards, the guns, and the National Guard, which governors control, they're not going to call them out on us, because FDR had already stopped them from calling out the U.S. Army or the military on workers, right? Before FDR, if you tried to go on strike or you had a militant something, or you tried to do a recognition strike, just walk off the job and demand a union until you come back on. We should do a lot more of that today too, by the way. So, which is a legal mechanism that hardly anyone even knows exists in this country. But anyway, you know, the federal army was called out to shoot striking workers in this country in the not too recent past. So once FDR said, okay, great, the army is not going to be called out to shoot American workers. So that takes care of the army. But then you have the National Guard, which is being called out to beat the crap out of and, you know, maim and hurt workers. Okay. So we have to take 2 governor's races in 2 key states, and we got to roll the new standards. And we got to roll Detroit and Flint and all of Michigan, and we've got to take Pittsburgh. So we got to take Pennsylvania, and we got to take Michigan. And they did it. And the rest is history. But people wake up in our history books like 1936, the labor movement really begins in 1936 when we shut down Detroit. No, it actually began so much ahead of that, and it began with power analysis and a strategy by a lot of smart people who like made maps of the country to try and figure out how do we win. So we have to do that. Like, if we could just do that, like if the progressive movement could just start saying, can we have a war room that's bigger than this building? Can we start making maps? Can we look at density? Can we figure it out? Like, have a coordinated and real strategy, which we just don't have it.
Let's talk about that. My last question, then we'll open it up, is for the environmental movement. I mean, this is one part. You were an environmental activist before you became involved in the labor movement. There has obviously been conflict between environmentalists and the labor movement. The Teamsters versus the Turtles. I mean, this is, you know, the one of many crises, but, you know, arguably the most existential threat. So talk about that division and how can environmentalists relate in a more productive way to the labor movement so we can have a chance at this.
Surviving?
At surviving,
Surviving,
yes.
yeah. It's a low expectation in my book, by the way, but yeah. So we can survive and rebuild democracy and have a good society again. You know, I do write about it and think about it, and part of what I always say in this country is the thing that's wrong is that the first 10 years of my life, I was known as a full-time environmental organizer, and for my entire rest of my life, I'm known as a trade union organizer. Like, that's the problem. You know what I mean? Like, and my communities do not meet. Like, I have a whole separate crowd from my early years in the environmental movement who I see at, like, marches and rallies. And it's like, hey, it's so good to see you. What happened to you? I went off to the labor movement. You know, it's like totally different worlds. So that's a huge problem, like, just for starters. So, and I talk about it in the book a lot. And I think I've been accused. I certainly wrote one big article in The Nation, one big article in Jacobin about this at different times. And I definitely get accused sometimes of sounding harsh towards the environmental movement about this. And I apologize if I do, but I also kind of believe it. Like, I left the environmental movement because I found it so frustrating. It was so not, let alone focus on the strategy stuff I was just describing. Like, there was no sense of strategy. And a lot of legislative policy, legal lawsuits, advocacy, sue 'em. Not a lot of time actually talking to people. And I was working in the environmental justice movement, so that was a very particular part of the environmental movement where we actually were engaging with people of color in large numbers when I was working in the U.S. South, in really poor communities. And even there, the national organizations that I was working for or dealing with just you couldn't have forced a class analysis on them if you tried. You know what I mean? So one day I woke up and I was like, I'm just done with this. And I'm going to go back to my family roots and go back into the trade union movement where we have a lot of problems, but we have a theory of power. And we have a plan and a sense of strategy when we want to. So I think that the environmental, some people are starting to do it much better right now. And that's new. It's really pretty recent that you've got folks who are understanding how to try. But I think, part of what I really believe is the same thing I was saying about good people who have not been involved in their unions, getting involved in putting together teams of workers and taking them over. It's going to take the same, there has to be a lot of internal work done to shift the unions on the environmental question. So what I say when I'm working with environmentalists is, so the thing that we do, one thing that unions do really well, when we want to do it well, again, there's bad and there's good, right? But in the best of our work, we do something called charting social relationships. So we will get to know in round one, if we're doing our work right, in the first round that I meet a worker, someone meets a worker, or workers are building their maps, we're going to find out every single thing about every single relationship that worker has in the workplace. And I really mean everything. Who slept with who had an affair, who didn't like who's carpools together, who eats lunch together, who goes to bars together. Everything is what we're going to need to know to win, just so you know that. Everything. And then if you're doing the work in the way that I was skilled in and come out of the 1930s, which is that that last part of what I was trying to do, and the union is a force for what the members want, right? In my very first union campaign, we had a giant gentrification thing going on around us, meaning the city was gentrifying. And so we were winning, union election, back to back to back, 4 or 5 a year, 5, 6, 7 a year, 8 a year, 9 a year. If you do that a lot in a bunch of markets, by the way, we'd have high union density again. But again, I digress. So we were winning everything in one labor market area. And it was like, there's this really big affordable housing crisis, and the mayor is going to move every black person out of the downtown now that they want the downtown back, and we're just going to stop it. So then we had to figure out every single thing about every relationship every worker had outside the workplace. So it became a second part of the method for me, which I did begin to sort of introduce in a methodical way. And
this
not
is Raising Expectations, right?
Yeah.
Which is also a great book.
Which is
a very, very interesting chapter.
Which is thank you. But I described that anti-gentrification campaign thinking maybe hint, labor movement, hey, why don't we do anti-gentrification campaigns all over the country? Last I looked, San Francisco, Seattle, Oakland, LA. Okay, I digress. Everywhere we need to be running anti-gentrification campaigns, right? New York City, everywhere. So, and we literally led with it. We made it the number one thing that we were doing. And so to do that, come back to climate, to do that, we just took the time-tested methods, all the same questions, and the charting mechanisms that we use in the workplace charting of finding out, who carpools with who whatever, all the relationships workers have. And then, it's all very transparent, by the way. There's not some secret weird thing. There's big open meetings, and everyone's, I know that Sally, and I go to lunch with her, and her kid goes to this kid with my school, and check, that's how we do it. And so then it's we're doing that with the community. Who goes to what church? Who goes to what synagogue? Who's a member? Whose kids go to school together? And I don't mean teacher, right? I organize healthcare workers. Whose kids are in school together? Who's in the same parent-teacher association? Whose kids are standing on the sidelines, kicking the balls in all the wrong directions in their own goal? What kids do when they're soccer. All these parents standing on the sidelines. So who goes to school together among the workers? And then we start doing all this about all these relationships. And then simultaneously, we're doing a power analysis of who actually holds power in the community. And then we're going to stitch those three things together, which is where do we have connections, where's the power lie, and how are we going to move the power structure around us so that we can, in that case, stop the gentrification, which, by the way, we did. So in its tracks, right, stop 6 giant housing complexes from being bulldozed, one after another. Down like that. I'm kidding. So we stopped that. I say to the climate justice movement, and I was just giving a training about this in Germany, and today working on the phone about a big campaign around the national bus driver sectoral contract coming up in Germany and the intense relationship that is being built with the climate justice movement right now in Germany. Look for that in the next 8 months. It's really good. So I was working with the climate activists there, and I said, I think what you need to do is reverse chart. So I took out the charts that we use, and I began to show them, like, what you need to do is figure out every single member of a union who comes to your meetings and then train them to go back into their union and actually begin to move the climate justice agenda as union members inside of their union. Like, you are not from the outside going to tell people, first we're going to take away your good job and replace it with a shitty job. That's just a bad strategy. Note to the climate movement. And they don't get it. Like, they don't get it. Like, I have these conversations that are so difficult, and I say, no. And they're like, no, but we're going to create a lot of jobs. And I'm like, okay, a job is not a job. You could work in an Amazon factory for crap wages and not piss in a bottle all day because you're not even allowed to, or you can actually, like, have a really nice unionized job where you're getting paid, what you should be, like $40 an hour or 50 or 60 if you're a highly skilled registered nurse, or $75 an hour once she forms a union and teaches the boss she's going to walk out on him if he doesn't behave. But in an auto factory, all of these factories, I mean, the debate that went on during the UAW strike was such a missed moment. Sunrise hit it. I was really proud of Sunrise for hitting it. Like, they put out some good press on it. That mattered, but it's not enough. Like, the UAW strike last fall gave us such an opportunity to try and make a national movement around this, and we failed again in the environmental movement. Like, the debate was about, could we keep open could we keep open and reopen 3 big plants that were being closed, and the trade-off was going to be, we're creating an electric car plant, and we're going to give you 100 battery jobs, when we're going to take away 4,000 workers' jobs. Like, that's not a winning strategy. So that's one problem. But I really believe that people are going to have to be able to strategically map every relationship they have into the labor movement. And when you've got 1,000, 10,000, 20,000, look at the numbers of some people coming to the climate marches. It's like, if you read the long article about Bernie and The Intercept recently, people were realizing in 2016 there'd be a big Bernie rally, people would show up at a Bernie rally, and no one collected any information. And you'd literally watch 100,000 people walk away from a rally and no one collected any information. Okay, they learned a lesson about that. So now there's more organizers there. So now they figured out how to actually capture who people are at their rallies, right? And the volunteer corps that's going on in Bernie land is super huge, because they figured out, hey, when you got 100,000 or 10,000 or 5,000 or 100 people show up at a meeting, you damn well better get every piece of information on them before they leave. So the climate justice movement, if they began, like I say to them, you got to map all the relationships that every single person in Sunrise and every person in 350 and every one of you has into the rank and file union membership, and then begin to organize with people from the inside to demand that their union change their position. That is the way that the unions will definitely change their position. I mean, the ones that need to change, versus the ones that are there already but are scared because the big ones yell at them if they do something and they say, you're not acting in solidarity with us and all that stuff. So that's the way to do it, and it's actually not hard. And I got more traction talking to a bunch of, like, the leading national climate activists in youth movement in Germany about how to do it, and they were just like, yeah. You know what I mean? And they're like, ow. They're like going to the bus drivers union. They're on it, because the bus drivers going to have a big strike in Germany this summer. And, like, who wants public transit? The climate justice movement, right? So they're making a very strategic decision in Germany to wrap themselves around the coming bus drivers war that's going to happen with the public bus service in Germany. We just don't have that kind of... We don't have that happening here. We don't have people waking up, like, which union is going to have a coming fight that's going to really matter, like the UAW fight did, like anticipating there's a whole bunch of workers who are going to be in a bunch of trouble and need a lot of help, and their issues fit right into the climate movement. So how do we go strategically start building really deep, not transactional, deep relationships? And we're going to do that by charting every relationship we have into that union.
Really, Jane makes you feel we can do it, because we can. Yep. Thank you so much for that. Are we We're good? Okay.
So we're just over an hour. We can maybe do a lightning round of 2 or 3 if you guys are interested. If you raise your hand, I'll do my best to bring you the mic.
Lightning round.
Hey, Jane, thanks for hanging. It's great to see you. Curious, I can imagine what IRI is doing in a workplace where there's an active union organizing campaign. What do you imagine Ira is doing at Google?
Good. You want to take a few questions? You want to do 3 or 4 at once, and then I'll just answer them? Okay.
I'll do a nice part.
Okay.
So I have a related question. What difficulties do you find approaching the growing labor within tech? It's a young community with high turnover. People are literally not staying more than 18 months max at a position, and there's also a very strong culture of anti-organization. When Google employees did their walkout, within tech circles, social circles, it was extremely unpopular. When a Google employee made a little pop-up to point out hey, you guys have labor rights, she was fired, and that was extremely popular. And there's even debates on diversity initiatives, are those okay? Even that level of organizing is very kind of frowned upon almost in a lot of circles. So what are your challenges in that kind of sphere in particular?
Maybe 1 or 2 more from over here, if anybody has a question.
Hi, Jane. I work as a housing organizer now in East Harlem, and I'm thinking about how, if there are ways to translate the type of high participation union organizing do from a workplace to a building or a neighborhood, or if I should just quit my job and go back into the labor movement.
Does that have to be a choice? Okay, sorry.
We can do one more for my union sister over.
Hi, I work here.
Thank you for the work you do.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having the place ready.
It's been great to have you here. We're United Auto Workers, for the record, if anyone doesn't know that.
Me too.
I want to ask you one question: do you feel in any way that the Red State teacher strike, the West Virginia teacher strike, had any effect on people's attitudes in the southern states and in right-to-work states? And if so, how?
Yeah, great. Great. Thank you for those lovely questions. I'm going to start backwards, I think. So I definitely think that the West Virginia strike had an effect not just on I think the West Virginia education strike in particular had a huge impact. That we're still, I think there was. I wake up in the morning thank you, West Virginia. I feel like every day still. So I think it had a big effect. I think we need a lot more of them, but I think it had a big effect. But my experience, I'd lived in the South when I was young at a place called the Highlander Center, where I was working as a young educator, which I would call an organizer, by the way. The same principles of what a good educator is at the Highlander Center is what a good organizer is. But so I think my experience there was that people all around the South were interested in unions all the time. It's just the repression was incredibly intense. So I think that what the West Virginia strike did was just show people again that you can do it, right? So every time workers see a really good example of workers walking off the job and winning, it emboldens more workers to walk off the job and win, which is exactly why the Koch brothers and the right wing have been attacking unions so hard for so long. And it's I keep waiting for it to hit again, right? They couldn't pull it off. They couldn't attack them in ways they wanted to in Los Angeles. They just couldn't do it. And they couldn't even do it in West Virginia, and that's the particular history of the coal miners. I mean, there were people in West Virginia ready with, shovels and other things to defend those mostly women when they walked off the job if they needed it. And I was interviewing this one worker, and she said, she was one of the 6 counties that went out on the one-day strike first in Mindale County, which is coal county, right? So that people don't know, the coal counties went out first and did this one-day strike in late January before the big strike began. And I'm interviewing her, and she said, literally, my grandfather called me and said, I can't curse quite that way here, but it was a big series of curse words. What the bleep, 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 bleep is an effing one-day strike. You walk out and you walk out. She was like, guys, we got to walk out. We can't do this one-day thing, right? So that, it's like West Virginia, like building on miners' history, right? You walk out until you win. So, and a lot of them really they were really getting lectures from the older generation there. So I think it matters when people see people win. It doesn't matter that people see people struggling. I mean, honestly, I'm in a lot of debate about that my whole life, too. Like, good fight, no. I'm sorry. As an organizer, like, good, valiant fights, no. You need to win. Because when you win, other people learn to win. So that's what West Virginia did, and it kicked off a lot of really good work. And the work was uneven, though, right? I say in the book, the work was uneven. Like, some of that work was way better than others. Arizona was amazing. West Virginia was amazing. Oklahoma was problematic. Colorado, Kentucky. Like, good things happened, but they were less ready. They were less actually organized. So I think it was brilliant, and I think it did brilliant things, and it's still having ripple effect, and we got to go way more of it. So that's that. I don't want any housing organizer to quit, but what I want, just like the climate work for me in my life, is to make it the same, right? I was able to make it the same, so that was really joyous to me. And by the way, I do tell that story in the first book. I didn't like wake up, and I had 4 good unions who I was working with in the campaign that became the AntiGentrification campaign. I did not wake up and like say to the 4 big union leaders in New England, hey, I got this great idea, and we're going to work on this campaign about housing because it really matters to the workers. And they were like, go call Acorn. Literally, like little girl, go call Acorn, Jesus. And like shooed me out of the room, and I was like, oh, I'm not going to go call Acorn. I mean, no offense, especially now, we need Acorn back. But anyway, but I was like, but you smoking crack? Like, this is the biggest organizing opportunity I've ever seen. Like, we're going to go knock on the doors of 6 giant public housing complexes where the workers don't have unions and stop the gentrification, and they're going to love us, and then we're going to form unions. By the way, that's the whole story of Stanford. Like, that's what we did. So, like that, they didn't see it. Didn't make any sense to them. It was not literally go Corey. I did wind up calling Zach, and anyway, I was forced into do a big meeting where I made the Acorn people not agree to what I wanted them to do, and then I went back to the unions, and I was like, they won't do it. Anyway, which wasn't really true. I mean, it was kind of true, but mostly I organized the workers to like go after each of their employers. That's like where I learned the climate justice lesson. I realized I actually couldn't persuade the union leaders to move on the housing fight, so I very carefully began to work with the members whose houses were the first ones that were going to be torn down, and had them. I organized the workers carefully and respectfully to completely organize the union leadership without them even knowing what was going on. So when people say, like, why don't the unions just do this thing? It's like, why don't you just start figuring out a strategy and make it happen? Because that's actually what organizers do. Like, when someone says no, we just go, okay, how are we going to do that? Right? Like that's what organizers do, literally. Like someone says no, or you can't do it, or it's impossible. And we just like go into the basement and put a bunch of shit on the walls and figure out how we're going to do it. So I want you to be able to do both, and ideally simultaneously. But yes, the short answer, sorry to make that shorter, I'll make it shorter. Yes, you can use every single tool that we use in a housing fight, and we did in the housing fight. So worker charting, wall place charting, structure tests, are 40% of the people who live in this building coming to the meeting? Well, who invited them? Was that person successful? So who did the invite in the third wing, in the public housing complex that no one came from? So either no one did invite them, or the person who did invite them has no capacity to move them, so she's not a leader. So let's go back to the drawing board for that area that no one came from and figure out who's the resident of the housing complex over there who actually, when she says, hey, everyone, we got to go to this important meeting, they're all going to come with her, because that's what a natural leader is. So all of the work is the same. And then ideally it should all be one, which it was in New York City, by the way, in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, right? The housing movement and the labor movement were the same thing. So we need to go back there. And then on the tech stuff, I'm just wrap on that. On the tech stuff, it's so deep. So first of all, where IRI Inc. comes in is this, like you were saying, in a well-organized workplace. No, IRI's job is to keep you out. So I only experience them in workplaces where there's no union, right? They get hired to stop a union from happening. That's why Google just hired them, right? To stop a union from happening in a sector where there's a lot of suspicion already. So part of the problem is I think that the progressive movement has not been being fine-tuned to what you, sister, were just talking about, which is a union. On the surface, if you think about it, it's so easy to position as like anti-innovation. And it's just what we don't need in high-tech Silicon Valley. Because we, move fast and break things, and we break up old institutional things that are bad, and we create new ones, and it's going to be really cool here. So you raised several issues, like young, age, turnover, and I just want to say really honestly that in America, turnover, age, it's all the same. So I want tech workers who are here or who read anything I write to not think that you're so precious in the way that some tech workers think you are. Like turnover, huge everywhere. Nursing home workers, hospital workers, man, they're in there for like 6 months. They're like, this place sucks, and they're out because they can get a job someplace else. Like if you're a good tech worker, you can quit because you can get another job somewhere. It's true for registered nurses too, right? So turnover can be very, very high. Like when I'm working with graduate workers, they're like, oh God, Jane, we only have people here for 5 years. And I'm like, it's a dream. You only have a PhD student for 5 years and you're kvetching to me? Like, go get them. You know what I mean? Like if I knew I had five, I could have 8, 12, whatever. Like you had at least 5 years, right? To like engage this worker and then train them for the job of the future that they're going to organize the job that they get to when they leave, right? Because it's a training ground. Every union campaign, we hope, breeds new ones. So people like frequently say we have really high turnover. So one is just turnover is real in every employment sector in this country, unless you're like a CEO. Anyway, but there are really ways in which the rap in Silicon Valley plays against the cultural norm. And I think that a lot of people haven't adjusted for that really well. And when you read the way some of the work is going on right now, like even if you're reading it in the New York Times, where I've been having a beef with the main reporter writing about it, like they're actually like encouraging people to like go read a book and form organizations that are not unions, right? There's a split in the movement, and there's a whole bunch of tech workers who are like, they've really taken the boss's message, which comes from IRI. So who's putting out the best, you know what IRI is doing right now? They're writing the best leaflet you've ever read about why life is going to be better here without a union. Like they're writing really good memos about diversity initiatives. They're writing really good memos about solving the Me Too crisis. They're writing terrific position papers on how things at Google are going to change to be more responsive to the needs of the workers. They are responsible, I think, for the 4 workers who were fired several weeks ago right near me in Silicon Valley. So they are firing people, and that is having a really freak-out effect in Silicon Valley right now. I have a bunch of those workers coming to I won't say the date of it, but coming to a workshop soon. So I'm really happy because I'm going to be digging in with a bunch of them, which I've not ever done. But so I think that people have to, like, storytelling and narrative and semantics in the words we use are super important in union organizing. So how you craft a rap, like in a good organizing campaign, the team comes together every morning and responds to whatever the message the boss is putting out, or we anticipate the message the boss is putting out, and we actually work the semantics. Like we work the best way to tell the story about the workers in the union, and like that is not happening every day in the Google work right now, right? So, and it needs to happen because there is a way to craft language around why a union is the only solution for high-tech workers, not just a good solution, but it needs a lot of really disciplined work. So I'm excited about the future of tech worker organizing. I think you raised a lot of questions that are really real ones, and I actually think that they're really overcomeable when some good organizing gets put in there. That's it.
I'm glad we got an applause break
Thank
in
you so
before
much,
the
Jane.
Q&A because that was amazing. Please keep you going for keeping the Astra.
Thank you.
So we are going to sign some books. If you'll just give us a minute to get set up in the front. If you don't have a copy of A Collective Bargain, we have them available over at the registers. Again, thank you so much, Jane and Astra, for being here with us.
And I want to thank Peter and all the staff at the Strand for all the work you do.